It began with restless nights and constant itching. Noah would wake up covered in red welts, convinced he had bed bugs. His father Oscar pored over countless articles online, learning everything there was to know about these nocturnal pests. Desperate to find a solution, he sought an expert's professional help. But once the expert saw those bed bugs, his face turned pale and he said, "These are not ordinary bed bugs. We need to leave your room now." None of the researchers spoke a word after hearing what these things in Oscar's bed really were. At first sight, it just seemed to be bed bugs, but after a thorough examination, they realized there was much more to it. Noah's parents couldn't believe it and demanded an explanation from the expert right away. There wasn't even time to pack their bags. They just needed to leave as soon as they could. But what was so dangerous? Why was the expert in such a panic, and why did they leave the house instantly? Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Like any other young kid, Noah was afraid of what may or may not be hiding under his bed. For that reason, he checked under his bed every morning. But he'd not see anything under his bed, but he did see something on it. He had no idea what it was, or that things would become much worse from here on. Noah was shocked and immediately ran downstairs. He yelled for his parents, but they didn't immediately respond. When he finally got their attention, he told them about his discovery. They didn't believe him at first, but when they saw the fear in his eyes, they went upstairs with him. And now it wasn't just Noah who was in shock. His parents, Oscar and Hilly, were also totally blown away by this. Oscar and Hilly decided to call an expert, not only to reassure Noah, but also to have the insects removed as soon as possible. The expert arrived quickly. Less than 15 minutes after they had made the call, he was already knocking on their door. When the expert heard the description of the find, he was shocked. Suddenly, he seemed in a hurry. Noah could tell that something serious was going on, and he was very scared. He had every reason to be. The expert stepped courageously into the room and carefully looked at the bed with a flashlight. Without saying anything, he kept checking the bed for several minutes while the family waited in suspense. The expert was screaming in horror. Why did the expert scream like that? What had happened in the bed? The family waited for the expert to come out of the room and explain what was going on, but he didn't do that. The expert finally opened the bedroom door, but avoided eye contact with the family. This is absurd, Oscar thought. He lost his temper and walked over to the man, demanding that he at least say what he saw and what made him scream. But the expert walked away, snapping at Oscar. "I need backup. Leave me alone." But this only raised more questions on Oscar's side. Wasn't this his house? And didn't it concern him more than the expert himself? Hilly wondered. These could not just be case on simple bed bugs, right? Meanwhile, the expert finally called for backup. He tried to explain everything over the phone, but Oscar and Hilly noticed that he had to repeat himself several times. Finally, the man hung up, waiting for the others to come their way. Oscar, Hilly, and Noah were asked to wait in the living room until the others arrived. They hesitantly obliged, but they wondered what the expert actually meant by backup. Not much later, the backup actually arrived. It was a whole team. They hardly paid attention to the family and only briefly nodded to little Noah. They went straight to his bedroom, where they carefully began the preparations. The operation had begun, and it wasn't going to be an easy one. Men in white suits filled Noah's room. They pushed all the furniture aside and gathered around Noah's bed, lifting the blankets carefully. But as soon as the bed was pulled apart, the expert's colleagues were also shocked. Oscar, Hilly, and Noah could now also clearly see the red bed bugs on the sheets. There were many more than he first expected. They still wondered what was so special about it. After carefully inspecting the apparent infestation, the team took a moment to discuss. Oscar tried to eavesdrop but couldn't hear their conversation. Eventually, the team decided to call the police. Oscar was shocked. Was it that bad? Were the police really needed? Not long after, the whole house was full of cops and scientists. It was an unreal situation for the frightened family, who tried to reassure each other. Oscar and Hilly found themselves less and less involved in the investigation and just focused on their family. Meanwhile, the police officer in charge arrived. He looked around the room with a serious face and had an obligatory chat with Oscar and Hilly. Oscar, Hilly, and little Noah tried to get closer. Yet they still couldn't hear anything because the experts and the police officers were whispering. Because of this, Oscar ran out of patience, and he joined the group. The officers immediately stopped whispering, but Oscar didn't care. Oscar firmly demanded an answer from the officers. But as he spoke to them, all the police officers did something Oscar never saw coming. They stepped back, and with a surprised look on their face, they said, "Sir, stay there. You need to lay on the ground and don't move." What is going on? Oscar thought. So, he slowly put his hands in the air and got down on his knees. Hilly and Noah looked at him with wide eyes from inside the house. Then, he was put into a police car, and they also put Noah and his wife into another police car, but they were all separated. What was going on? Finally, someone informed him, "We need to take you and your family with us, sir." What the heck? Was he being arrested? The mystery only deepened. After a 2-hour drive, they arrived at their destination, an airport. Oscar was confused, wondering what was happening. Suddenly, he was escorted onto a waiting helicopter and taken away. As Oscar flew through the air, his mind raced with questions. Where were they taking him? Was his family there already? Suddenly, he felt the helicopter descend. He looked down, but couldn't make out the shapes below. What was this place? Soon after, Oscar arrived at a base camp that seemed like a military camp, but there was something different about it. What could this place be, and why was he brought here? As soon as the helicopter landed, another team of white-suited people arrived and grabbed Oscar by the arms. They whisked him away into a nearby building, where they locked him up in a cell. 2 hours later, a man entered Oscar's cell, again fully packed with a white suit. He introduced himself as Alex, who claimed to work for a secret forces team. He apologized for the situation but insisted their actions had been necessary. Oscar demanded answers, but Alex remained mysterious about it. Alex sighed, looked at the ground and said, "I have to tell you something." Oscar's heart raced as the words sunk in. He yelled, "What? What? What?" Was something happening to Noah? Alex's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. "It's about your son." Alex's voice was grave as he told Oscar that he needed to regain his composure. His son had fallen somewhat ill after they had arrived at the facility. "It was probably the infestation in his bed," Alex explained, his face etched with worry. But what did that mean? Alex remained evasive about the nature of her illness, insisting it was top secret. Oscar didn't mind. His priority was his son, and he wanted to see him immediately. Another man entered the room and conducted a few tests on Oscar. A long and dreadful hour later, they received the results, and thankfully, Oscar was not infected by the bedbugs. He was relieved and eager to finally see his son again. Alex explained to Oscar he had to go through some protocols. He wasn't allowed to touch his son and had to wear a hazmat suit like everyone else. They told him his wife, Hilly, was still waiting on the test results, and if she were to be negative too, she would be joining him in their son's room. As Oscar walked down the long hallway, he bombarded Alex with questions, desperate for answers. What was the origin of the illness? Did it come from the bed bugs? Alex remained evasive, cautioning Oscar that some things were better left unsaid. After several minutes of silence, Alex finally opened up a bit. I can't reveal everything to you, but since your son is affected, I'll give you some information. But before I tell you more, we need to run some tests to be sure, Alex said, leading Oscar to his son's room. As Oscar walked into the room, he was struck with disbelief at the sight of his son lying in bed. He looked very tired. Alex continued. This illness is fairly new, and there have only been 3 cases known in the world. We're still testing various possible cures, but one really stands out. Alex suggested that if Oscar's blood was given to his son, his blood cells might adjust with Oscar's good blood cells, and it could possibly help save him. Without hesitation, Oscar agreed to do the blood transfusion and took a seat for the procedure. After they successfully filled the bag with Oscar's blood, they entered Noah's room and hung the bag of blood to let it drip into his veins. It was a waiting game now. Finally, Hilly arrived. She wore a white suit just like the rest, but her presence meant she tested negative for the virus as well, and that was reassuring. Oscar hugged his wife tightly, and they sat down next to their son, telling him encouraging words without even being sure she could hear them. Oscar was eager to know more about the shell, and Alex finally agreed to tell him everything. But on one condition, he had to sign a contract promising not to divulge the information to anyone. And without hesitation, Oscar immediately agreed. He couldn't wait to know what he was about to learn. Alex began to reveal information about the mysterious shell and the virus it carried, but Oscar sensed there was more to the story. The bed turned out to have an investigation of mutated bedbugs, a very rare new species that could have a somewhat poisonous bite. They had to find out where they came from and make sure they would not spread, and Oscar actually had an idea of what might have happened here. About a month ago, he had a friend come over from Brazil for a night. He had been deep in the rainforest just before that and could maybe have had some seeds stuck in his shoes. He slept in Noah's room for the night, so that would explain how the infestation had started there. Oscar's disbelief quickly turned into acceptance with all the information he now had. With his mind now focused on his daughter, he asked for an update on her condition. The doctors had good news for him. Noah was doing a lot better. Oscar was immensely relieved to learn that the blood transfusion had worked, as his son had finally woken up from his deep sleep. They embraced, and Noah asked what had happened. He already looked a lot better than a few hours ago. The next day, they asked if they could finally go home. But Alex told them that was a difficult situation, because their house was still in lockdown and needed to be thoroughly cleaned. Instead, they provided a temporary home for Oscar and his family where they could stay until it was time for them to go home.